Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and back here yet again with another Xbox 360 related video. Now, I've shown a few ways of installing games and such on here. However, I'm going to be covering something which is how to install multi-disc games. So I would say I'd recommend here, there is going to be timestamps to certain sections of the video if you're wanting to check those specific sections out. But this will be a bit of a longer video because it's not going to be as simple and as straightforward as you might expect on here. Now, we will start with the more simple approaches here, but there's essentially 3 different variations of this. I'm also going to go into different file types and such, and for my dashboard here I am using the Aurora dashboard. However, if you are using something such as Freestyle Dash, I'm not going to be showing that here, but it will be a little bit different in regards to that. Either way, to get started here, you will of course need your games that you are wanting to rip over and install over to your RGH or JTAG system. You will of course also need a hard modded Xbox 360 system, and I will also be covering this using both game discs that you will have on hand, or if you have your games backed up in ISO format, that will require a computer to use that, but I will also show that as well too. Either way, getting into this here, there will be 2 formats essentially that you will need to know about. There's going to be extracted format, which is just going to be all of the game's files from a disk extracted into a directory just as their raw files. The nice benefit with this is if you are playing a game which you do want to modify quite a bit, like you want to tamper with the files, you want to change around the files in there, for example, to change things such as, I don't know, add in more mods, skins, whatever it might be, file format usually works well for that. However, if you're really just wanting a more containerized format that's not going to have as many files, because you're not going to be transferring, sometimes hundreds or thousands of files, you might only be transferring tens of files, you can put your game into a games on demand format, otherwise known as GOD. I'm going to be going over both of them here, but I'm describing this because in GOD format, the nice thing is there's less files to work with when installed to your hard drive or to your USB device. However, if you're wanting to actually modify the game files themselves, you're not going to be able to do that as easily. So just keep that in mind, depending on what you want to do, whether you want to have raw file format or if you want to have them in GOD format. So I'll be using those 2 terms there. I'm going to be talking about extracted format and GOD format throughout the rest of this video. And before we fully delve into this, I did want to give a shout out to Atlas over on 7 Cents, because essentially their post here, I thought it was pretty good, and it was kind of the catalyst for me to make this video here. They do a really great job of explaining, just 3 different types of situations that we're going to be covering here, which is going to be installing content, actual discs that you play off of, and a weird example that we're going to cover here at the end. So if you're wanting to check this out here, I'll have it linked down below in the description, but a big shout out to them in regards to installing multi-disc games on a hard modded system. Real quick, I did want to add in a section here in regards to title updates, downloadable content installs, and you. Now, there are a few games out there that have been re-released, such as the Skyrim Legendary Edition, or I believe the Ultimate Edition of Fallout New Vegas, which have the base game on one disc, and then the second disc is a install disc, which typically has a title update and it has the downloadable content that you copy out of there. So it's not required to play, but all the bonus goodies are on that disc. However, as I said, it needs a title update. If you don't grab or install the title update from the disk itself, what you can do is, in my example here, let's say this is Wolfenstein, you can highlight the game itself in Aurora, you can tap the Y button for the details, go down to title updates, make sure you are connected online, then tap the A button, go to Marketplace, and if there's any title updates that you can download, go ahead and do that. This is good not only because some of these games, especially, hey, I'm referencing Bethesda games right there, they are glitchy, so it does at least help. That's what we tell ourselves. It does help to remedy some of those glitches, But on top of that, so much of that downloadable content was released after the game was released, sometimes months or years later, of course. And many times that downloadable content will not be visible or accessible in-game until you have a title update. So it's just best practice to download the latest title update you can. As you can see, it's been installed, but lastly, you'll need to go to Installed, tap the A button on your title update to enable it, and now at this point you can come up here, run your game. As you can see, it applies the title update, and then it should boot up your game successfully. Now for our first example here, we're going to be covering games that are typically on 2 disks but will have a content install. What I mean by that is you do have 2 disks with your game, however one of them is only to install content onto the console and the other one is the disc that you play from. One huge example for this is Grand Theft Auto 5, however I'm not going to be using that, I'm actually going to be using Halo 4. Halo 4 has 2 discs. The second disc you have to install content if you want to do the multiplayer, and the first disc is going to be the play disc. So for our first example, this will be how to handle content install games. If you're doing this from disk, it's going to be pretty simple. You're going to take your content install disk and just pop it into your Xbox. So for my example here, I'm going to be using Halo 4. I know for an example that this is DVD 2, so I've just popped it into the DVD drive here. As you can see, it has been detected, and I'll go ahead and launch this. Nothing really all too special, but give this a few moments to boot up. So we've got Halo 4 booted up. Now I'm going to press start. And as you can see, the only option here is install disk 2 because disk 2 is for the multiplayer component. So I'm going to press the A button, wait a few moments, and as you can see, it was able to detect the internal hard drive I have installed, and it's just going to copy the installable game data from the DVD onto the internal hard drive on the Xbox 360. This one is thankfully pretty simple because you're just operating this DVD like normal. So just spend a few minutes, let it do its own thing, and once it's done, you can take the disc out. Alright, so after several minutes, we should be getting to the end here, or at least we're like 99% of the way there. And there we go. It now says the content is installed, so please insert the Halo 4 play disc now. We can hit OK on this, or what I'm actually going to do is just exit out of here. So I'm going to go back over to Aurora because the content is now installed from the content installation disk itself. So we no longer need to worry about that. The next thing we can do is now remove the content disk because we don't need that at this point. I'm now going to insert disk 1 specifically for Halo 4 because I know that this is the play disk. So again, once you have that content installed, whether it's for Halo 4 or something else such as Grand Theft Auto 5, you don't need that content installation disk unless you ever decide to delete that content. So here we go, I have the disk popped in here. This is disk 1, which is going to be the play disk, and we can now work on backing this up. So like I said at the beginning of the video, there's either the extracted file format or the God container file format, and you can choose how you want to extract this out. If you want to extract this game out as raw files, what you can do is, if you're using Aurora or XeXMenu or any other file manager, in Aurora for example, press back on your controller, go to the file manager, go down to DVD, and then what you'll do is hit the X button on every single one of these files and folders, and just go all the way down until you get to the end. The one we can exclude though if we want is System Update, since we don't need that. Come over here to the left, go down to the copy function, press A, so it's going to include all the files here to copy, and at this point press the right bumper on your controller, go over to your storage device, mine I'm going to be using HDD1, go over to where you put your games, and over here, move over to the left, go all the way up, create a new folder, and in this one, I'm going to call this, for example, Halo 4, just something like that works. Go into Halo 4, or whatever your game is, go to the left, hit paste, say yes to this here. It's going to take a few moments to scan for everything it needs, and it's now going to copy over all of the raw files into that folder. So this here can take several minutes to do, and again, the main benefit is that you have access to all the raw files here. However, the downside will be if you're ever scanning your drive, if you're transferring files, it can take some time to transfer a whole mess of files to and from another drive. So that is how you can do this in a extracted file format. However, I'm going to abort this for now, and I'm now going to show you how you can do this in a God container if you're using Aurora. So for this here, I'm going to delete this out because I'm not going to need this here. And if you're using Aurora, for example, let's just go ahead, start at the beginning here. You should have your disk in the drive. You can press the back button on your controller, go down to scripts. If you don't already have this here, the disk to God installer, you're going to want to open up the repo browser, go down to utility scripts, go down to Aurora disk to God installer, and go ahead and install this script if you have not already done so. Once it has been installed, we can go back, and you should now have the Aurora disk to God installer. Press A on launch, and from here you're going to need to select where you want to save this to. So you're going to go to your storage device, which in my case will be the internal hard drive, so HDD1. Go into content, and from here you're going to want to highlight and you're going to press Y on the zeros directory. There should be a directory exactly like this that has 16 zeros. Make sure you hit Y on this to select it. And it's now going to ask about creating the title ID and a subdirectory. Say yes to this. At this point now, it's going to do about the same process where it's going to parse the disk and now it's going to transfer it over. So as you can see, as opposed to copying over hundreds or even thousands of files that you're going to be working with, we're going to break this down and really contain it into about 46 files right here, which is a lot less to work with. So it will be easier to move around in that regard. However, the downsides again to God format are going to be if you want to modify individual files and replace them, you won't be able to do so as easily. On top of that, you can't just put them into a folder called Halo 4. It has to be within the content and all zeros directory. But either way, with whichever method you are using, go ahead and wait for your install to complete. Once it's finished copying the game over as a God package, it might ask you to rescan, and you can go ahead rescan there. As you can see, I now have 2 copies of Halo 4. I have the disk version and I have the one installed on my hard drive itself. I'm going to remove the DVD from the drive. So as you can see, after it refreshes, let me go ahead, that's been removed, took it out. There should be nothing in the drive now, but we now just have the Halo 4 game itself showing up. So that's exactly what we're looking for. The actual play disk is what you're looking at. So we can now open this up. It's playable. We can run trainers if we want to. We can also check for tile updates, change the cover, all that fun stuff. Right here, tile updates. That's what I was looking for. So as you can see, that's all there is to it. We've ripped over the play disk itself, so whenever we fire up this copy of Halo 4, we'll be able to play. And as for the actual content itself, I'll show you where that is. We can bring up the guide, go over to System Settings, and if we come over to Storage, go over to our internal drive, which is where we installed this here, go to Games, I'm going to find Halo 4, and right here, as you can see, this is Halo 4, which is the disk that we quite literally just installed over. And this is the Spartan Ops Season 1.0 and War Games. So these are the 2 pieces of downloadable content that we were able to copy from Disk 2, and this is Disk 1 that has been installed. So there you go, that's how you do it if you're ripping your game from disks and you have a required installation disk. Now if you're like me, I was using the disks on my console, however I've also backed up my disks in ISO format previously just to preserve them and everything, and so I wouldn't have to use them as often, thank goodness, just keep them safe on the shelf. So if you have your disks backed up in ISO format already, there's going to be 1 or 2 tools that you can use, and this is really going to be here on Windows. I have links for them down below in the description, but if you're going to be doing one of these games which has a install disk, meaning that you have a separate disk that you only pop in one time, it does a content install and then that's it, and you have another disk you play off of, examples being Halo 4 or Grand Theft Auto 5, I'm going to show you how to manage that. The one software you'll need for sure is something such as Xbox Image Browser. I know there's a few pieces of software out there such as Extract ISO, and there's some other ones. However, I've just noticed this one, it's pretty simple and it's worked the best for me over the years here. So I'm going to have this linked down below in the description. You can download it here, and it is worth noting if you're getting a OCX error like this, there is instructions on the webpage showing what you can do to copy this file if needed into a certain directory and register it on your computer. Thankfully, I've already done that on mine a while ago, so I haven't had to do it here, but you're just going to download this and save it somewhere you can easily find it. Second, you're going to need to determine what type of file format you want to have that play disk in. The install disk we have to extract, but the play disk you can either play in extracted form or God format, whichever one you want to do. Just remember I talked about those near the beginning of the video here. If you're wanting to convert it into a God format, I'll show you how to do that here, and you're going to use another program called ISO to God. Exact same thing right here. You're just going to come to the page, download it, and save it somewhere you can easily find it. And of course, since these are archive files, if you ever have any trouble extracting them, you can download something such as 7-zip to extract it and make it quite easy. Just go ahead, download this right here, install it, and you should be all good to go. Alright, so now that we're here, our first tool we're going to need for sure is going to be the Xbox image browser. For this, we can right click and extract it into its own folder. Go ahead, open this folder up, and within here it's pretty easy. There's this OCX file which you might need to register if needed, a text file, and the Xbox image browser application. Go ahead, open this one up. Thankfully, this tool is pretty easy to use. You can click on File, click on Open Image File, browse out and find your ISO. As you can see, I have my Halo 4 discs that I have backed up, so the disk 2 is going to be the install multiplayer one. Click on this and open it. Now this is what you're going to be looking for. There's going to be all these folders and all these files here. The only one we need to pay attention to is this content folder, and that's going to be our content install. You can go into here, go in here, and as you can see, these are the actual pieces of content, or DLC in a way, that are required to install on your game. Grand Theft Auto 5, for example, has content you have to install. Halo 4 has content if you want to play multiplayer. Either way, what you need to do is find the content directory, right-click this directory, and click on Extract. What you'll need to do here is go ahead, find your folder where you want to extract all the contents into, and you can even create a new folder there. Then once you select that, you can click on OK. Once you've made that selection, go ahead and give it a little bit of time to extract out. As you can see, this is going to retain the folder contents or the folder structure, but there's only 2 files that it's extracting out, so this one doesn't take all too long to work on. And there we go. Once it is completed, we can now click on File, close image, and now if you want to work on the other disk, again, you can either pick extracted files or you can pick God, like a God container for this, depending on which one you want to use. I'll go ahead and show you how to extract out an ISO. So for this, you're going to click on File, Open Image File, and from here, find the other disk. In this case here, it's going to be the disk 1, which is going to be for the campaign itself, and that will allow you to play multiplayer once you have this installed. But either way, grab your other disk, and once you have that selected, you're going to highlight the disk ISO itself, right-click this, and click on Extract. From here, it's the exact same thing as before. You're going to find the folder or create the folder you want to extract this to and click on OK. Once you click OK, as you can see here, Halo 4 has 110 files it's going to be extracting, so just wait for it to do its thing. It could take a bit of time. This one has about 7 gigabytes worth of data to extract out, but let it do its thing and just be patient. And here we go. Once it is completed, there's not going to be any more activity going on, so we can click on File, close image, and then File and Exit. If you're wanting to use this in God or Games on Demand format, because that's going to be a container, you can grab ISO to God, right click this, and extract it into its own folder. From here, double click on the folder you've created, and there's going to be 2 executables, ISO to God and XeXTool. The only one we care about here is ISO to God. This is essentially just going to work in tandem with this, but we're never going to actually touch this. So we can go ahead, open up ISO to God, and it's a pretty simple looking program. It's thankfully easy enough to use here. So for this, you'll first want to click on Settings. Once you're within Settings, there's going to be a few settings you need to tweak here. You're going to have to set your output path, so you can just browse out to that, and your rebuild path. Just again, browse out to that. I've already set mine here, and if anything, I would recommend keep them on the same drive that you have your ISOs on, so there's going to be less transferring here. But once those two are set, you can also make sure that all of these are set here. I recommend keeping the padding to full, but do keep in mind here, while we are building this, it is going to take quite a bit of storage here. Essentially, take the size of your ISO and just to be safe, multiply that by 3, and that's going to be the total amount of storage we're going to need for a bit. So we can click on Save Changes. Now you need to add your individual ISO. So click Add ISO, click on Browse for the image location, find wherever your ISO has been saved to. So since we've already extracted out the install, we just need the play disk. So click on the play disk, hit Open, let it load in. If you need to edit anything here, you can, but everything loaded up successfully. And as you can see, our output is set, our rebuild is set, and we do want to make sure this is set to full, and we're going to save that rebuilt ISO image. Don't worry, we are going to clear that out later. But once that's all done, click on Add ISO. Now once that's added, you can click on Convert and let it do its own thing. What it's going to do in the background here is it's going to extract out all of the Xbox 360 ISO contents into a new ISO file without any of the extra padding. Then it's going to convert that smaller ISO file into a God package. So there's a few extra steps here to clean this up, but once it's cleaned up, it's pretty nice and easy enough to work with. So as you can see, the ISO image has been rebuilt, and it's doing all this automatically. You don't have to do anything extra here. Now it's going to begin writing all of the parts. So this is it here, creating our games on demand container. Again, all this is happening automatically. You don't have to touch anything here while it's going. So here we go. This is our God package. It has completed here, finished in 2 minutes, 13 seconds. We can now close out of ISO to God. Now what you want to do is navigate over to the directory you made for ISO to God, which has the output and rebuild directories that you might have created. Right here in the rebuild directory, you're going to see a smaller ISO file here. We no longer need this since this has been completed. So you can go ahead, delete this right off the bat. This is not the original ISO, this is the new one that we made. So the new one you can now remove because we don't need that. And then the output directory here, this is going to have our actual game itself. If we go into this directory, as you can see, this is how it looks in God format. So now, whether you want to play this from an external drive or if you want to transfer it over to your system using a USB drive or FTP or what have you, I'm going to show you at least on a USB drive what you can do for this. So in order to transfer your game over, you are going to need a USB thumb drive here or an external drive, whatever you're using. Make sure to set to MBR, make sure the file system is FAT32, and from here, we can copy everything over. First of all, remember the install content that we had to rip out? Well, let's transfer that over. So wherever you've extracted it, I extracted mine into disk 2. You're going to find that content directory. You're just going to want to right click and copy this content directory. And on your USB drive, you might already have one, but if not, we can just paste it right here. So this is now going to transfer over that required installation data. And this is what we're going to transfer back over to the Xbox 360 itself. While we let that copy over, if you are using an extracted version, this is what you can do. Over here, you can go ahead, grab the contents of your extracted game disk. So for this, I'm going to find my disk 1. As you can see, it'll look a little something like this here. These are just all the raw files. And I'm actually going to rename this to Halo 4. So from here, you can right click your game, copy it out, go to your USB drive, and next to that content directory, you can make a games directory, for example, just like that. Or you might already have one. Go into the games directory and then paste in that extracted version of the game that you have created. Altogether, this is about 10.5 gigabytes worth of data, so we can just wait for this here. All right, so this has been copied over, so we should be all good at this point. So yet again, if you are doing this here, you should have your installable contents within the content directory, the zeros directory, then here, and it should look something like this. And if you're going to be using a raw extracted file format version of the game, it should be within your games directory, And it should look something like that on your USB drive. Whether you want to play it from here or transfer it over, it's going to be up to you. However, if you're someone who you prefer the Games on Demand package, I will show you how to copy that over. Go over to your ISO to God directory, wherever you set your output to, and you're going to find this mismatch of numbers and letters. It should look like this, so you should have one folder, you should have another folder, then you're going to have a file with a .data accompanying folder, and inside of here, this is the same disk 1, except it is within a God container. So for this here, you're going to come back out again to your output directory, grab this first folder, right click, and copy it. And wherever you're transferring it to, whether it be through FTP or on your USB drive, go here, for example, to your USB drive. You need to go into the content directory, go into the zeros directory, and you're going to paste it right here. If you're doing this all through USB, you might already have one here already, so it's okay to merge it, but right click and paste. So as you can see, this is still the same disk 1, but it is within a God container or God package. It's going to take about the same amount of time here, but there's a lot less files that we need to work with. So let this just copy over and do its own thing. Alright, so back over at your console, you're going to want to plug in your USB drive if you're using one to transfer data to and from. And let's go ahead and show what you can do with this. So for this here, if you are going to play directly off your USB drive, like some people might be doing, you can press the back button on Aurora, go to File Manager, and if you're going to be running the raw file formats themselves, you can do that by going to the USB drive, Games, find your game right here, and launch the default XeX. You can of course also set the paths as well too, which some of you might have done if you're playing from an external drive. To do that here, you would always have to go into Settings, you'd go to the Content, and from here you would add paths. So for this, you would, for example, go to USB 0, you'd go into Content 0, and you would change that if you're doing it with a God container. Otherwise, if you're just doing raw file format, you would do the same thing with Games, and then set that all accordingly. However, we're not going to be doing that here. I'm going to show you how you can transfer these over, so it's easy enough on here. If you want to play from your internal drive, you can press the back button and open up the file manager. If you're going to use this or Freestyle or XeXMenu, it's up to you. And for this, go over to your USB drive. Now over at your USB drive, if you want the raw extracted file format version of the game, you can go into Games, and then grab your folder itself and hit X to select this folder, come over to the left, go down to Copy, tap A, and then tap the RB button on your controller, go to your hard drive, which this will be the internal one, HDD1, you can go to your Games directory, and you can paste in your copy of Halo 4 right here, or whichever other game you're going to be copying over. However, let's say you've copied over the play disk, you still need the content. So if you have the content itself here, which you should have copied over, I'll show you how to copy that as well. This will include the downloadable content itself, like from that disk that you ended up pulling the content folder from. But if you are using the Games on Demand version of this game, this will also contain the full game. So for this here, if you want to transfer it over, you would just go into the content directory, go into the zeros directory, and grab the title ID. As you can see, it shows up as Halo 4. Tap the X button to highlight it, go to the left, go down to Copy and tap A. Now hit the RB button on your HDD1, so you will have to go to HDD1, go into Content, go into the zeros directory, and now move back over to the left and tap A to paste in here. And it might ask you if you want to override anything. I'm going to say yes to this just in case, because I know it's not here. And at this point, it's now going to copy over the content itself. So again, if you've extracted out the game as raw files, you should copy that out first, but you still need to copy out the folder from the content directory. If you are doing it with a Games on Demand container, this is going to bring over the content and it's going to bring over the game itself. So just give this a few minutes to transfer over. Alright, so there we go. We've been able to successfully transfer all that content over. Just to show you all that it's been there, I'm going to open up the guide, go over to my system settings. Let me go ahead and also remove the USB drive as well, since that's no longer needed. But we can go over to our storage, go to the hard drive, check out the games, and Halo 4 is right here, and I chose to copy over the Games on Demand version, but we also have the installable content that we need on the hard drive if we ever want to play multiplayer. So let's go ahead, go back into Aurora, just relaunch this here, and as you can see, if we come over here, we do have this showing up successfully. So we are able to now have our game installed. It is playable. This is the play disk that is on here, whether it was extracted or a God container. And on top of that, we also have the content installed to the hard drive. So we're all good to go at that point. Now for our second situation, this might be a game where it has 2 or more discs, but all of the discs are discs that you play from. Some examples could be Rage, Max Payne 3. In my example here, I'm going to be using The Witcher 2. First of all, this is really important. There is going to be one setting you're going to have to verify and tweak within Dashlaunch itself. What you can do is find Dashlaunch on your installation, open this up, and here you're going to come down to Behavior, and there's going to be this setting at the bottom, which is AutoSwap. Now pay attention to this. It says here, if enabled, Dashlaunch will perform automatic disk swapping. Warning, do not enable if you use FSD or swap XeX for this. To verify this, there's a few things here. You can go over to your plugins, and if you don't have any plugin for swap.xex, you're in the clear. However, it did mention FSD, and that would be for Freestyle Dash. If you are a Freestyle Dash user, you're going to keep this disabled, because that's going to handle this by default. However, I'm using Aurora, so for that, I'm going to tap A to enable this. You're now going to have to hit the RB button, go down to wherever you save your launch.ini, which will probably be HDD, tap the X button to save that, and from here, we can go ahead, hit RB yet again, and quit. It should then relaunch our default dashboard. So here we are, we were able to make that change. That's going to be the first thing that you need to do. Now for these games, if you're just going to be installing multi-disc games, whether they are 2, 3, or 4 discs, these ones are pretty simple if you're going to be playing from all of them. Again, some other examples might be Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey. It doesn't have to be limited to 2 discs, it could be 3 or 4 discs. In my case here, I'm going to be using The Witcher 2 for this example, so I've just popped in the DVD. As you can see, everything was able to pop up in regards to this here successfully, so we are going to have to copy both game discs over. For this, I'll go ahead and show you. If you're using an extracted raw file format version, where you just want the raw files extracted to your drive, you can press the back button if you're using Aurora, go to File Manager, go over to DVD, and exclude System Update, but you're going to hit X on every single file and folder. There's only one folder and 2 files right here. Move over to the left, go down to Copy, tap A to copy those. Now hit the RB button, go down to whichever drive you're using. For this, I'm going to use HDD1. Go to wherever your games are saved, create a new directory here, and call it whatever you're wanting. So for this, I'm going to call this just the same as the game. Nothing too surprising, but I'll call it The Witcher 2. So The Witcher 2 has been created, but here's another step you need to take. Inside of that directory, you're going to have to make a new directory here for each disk, and you're just going to call each one of them disk 1, 2, 3, or 4. In my case, I've popped in disk 1, so I'm going to call this here disk 1, which is a huge surprise. Either way, once that is all set up, now go into disk 1 for your first disk, tap left, go all the way down to paste, say yes, and now let it queue up the files, and it's now going to copy and paste them from the DVD to your internal drive, and this will be for our first disk. Just give it some time to rip. So here we go, we were able to copy over disk 1 successfully. So in this case, once that's all completed, once you are creating a disk 2 folder, if you're going to do extracted for all of them, just in this same directory where you have Witcher 2, for example, or whichever your game is, from here you do the exact same steps. You'd create a new folder, you'd call this disk 2, just like this, and then inside of the disk 2 folder, you would then go in here and you would copy all the contents from your disk 2 DVD into the disk 2 folder. Now do keep in mind here, if you are scanning for your games and you're not able to find them here, what you might need to also do is go into your settings here. So back out, you would press the start button on your controller, go down to content, you might have to go to your paths that you've set, and right here, for example, I set my script path for a depth of 2. You might have to change that, so if you did what I just did, you'll have to set it to 3, you can hit save, and we can go ahead restart. So I still have my Witcher 2 in the DVD drive here, however, it was able to find something else, and as you can see here, we have Witcher 2 on DVD, but we also have disc 1 that's ripped over here. Awesome. So again, now you would need to rip over disk 2. Now if you want to copy over your disks using a games on demand like a God container, what you can do is press the back button for system, go down to scripts, and you want to make sure that you have the Aurora disk to God installer. If you do not have that, make sure you're connected to the internet, go down to the Aurora repo browser, go down to utility scripts, and download the Aurora disk to God installer. And that's all good. I'm going to replace that, and once that's all done, we can go back yet again, and make sure Aurora disk to God installer is showing up. Once it does, tap A, make sure you have your DVD already in the drive. Now go down to HDD1 or wherever you're going to be saving this to, go to your content directory, highlight the zeros directory and tap Y. It's now going to ask if you want to create a title ID and a subdirectory, say yes to this, and now it's going to rip the disk over to your drive, whether it's internal or external, but it's going to be in a God or games on demand format. Alright, so once that's all done here, it might ask if you want to scan for new content, go ahead and say yes. We can now go ahead back out of everything here. I'm also going to remove the DVD itself. So there we go, we've popped that out. Now, it did remove it from my Aurora dashboard, but you can see I have 2 copies of The Witcher 2. And check this out, this is how it should look whether you're doing it within a raw file format like extracted, or you're doing it in a God package or container here. You should have 2 of them showing up. Now, even if the titles are the same or different, you can also tell what they are here by looking in the bottom right corner. You see, for multi-disc games, there's going to be a couple of circles that show up. As you can see out of the couple here, because this is a 2-disc game, the first one here is highlighted because I'm highlighting that one. The second one is highlighted because I'm highlighting that one. Now, the cool thing is when you are playing the game, whenever you have to swap over from disc 1 to disc 2, if you have them both showing up in Aurora and AutoSwap has been enabled, it should automatically detect and swap over for you. And if you no longer want both of these copies showing up within Aurora, what you can do is I would suggest keep disc 1 on here, but disc 2 or any of the other discs, for example like Blue Dragon with 3 discs or Lost Odyssey with 4 of them, you can highlight the ones you want to hide, tap the Y button, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom and move over to the left. Where it says rename, you're going to move to the left and you're going to look for the hide option, then tap A. It's going to do that, and then once you back out of here, as you can see, you now only have 1 copy of your game showing up. However, rest assured you do have both of them installed on your console, and whenever you go from disc 1 to disc 2 or from disc 2 to disc 3 or what have you, as long as you have AutoSwap set up, it will automatically swap for you. So that is the fantastic thing about the usage here. And if you ever want to modify these in any way, for example, or even delete them to save space, you can tap the B button while you're running Aurora, and under Filters and Sort, navigate over to Options and enable Show Hidden Titles. Then back out of this. It will now show any titles that you've hidden. So if you ever want to rename this, modify it, delete it, what have you, you're welcome to do that. So there we go, that is how you can install these from disk. Now, if you have your disks backed up in ISO format and you're wanting to use the ISOs, that is totally fine. I'm going to show you how to do that as well. We will have to move over to the PC, but as I just said in the previous section, you will need to go over to Dashlaunch, make sure you have this installed and running, and you'll need to go to Behavior, go down to AutoSwap, And here's the thing, make sure this is enabled if you are using Aurora as your main dashboard. If you're using Freestyle Dash or the Swap XeX, you will not be using this here. You can check that by really just seeing, first of all, if your default dashboard is Freestyle Dash, you're not going to use this, but you can also close out of this, go down to plugins, and if you don't have a Swap XeX, you should be fine. However, if you do need to change that for Aurora, make sure it is set to enabled, then go over to the next section with the RB button, go down to wherever you save your launch INI, and hit the X button, mine is on the hard drive, then hit the RB button yet again, go down to quit, and you'll also be able to verify what your default dashboard is here, because in case you forgot, it shows it, so since mine is Aurora, I will need that. With that all in place, let's go ahead and move over to our PC. On the PC, you will need a few downloads. First of all, you are going to need the Xbox 360 image browser if you're going to be playing these games as a extracted file format. So if you just want the raw files extracted onto a USB drive or onto your hard drive, this is what you're going to use. You're going to be using the image browser. Now you can just download it here, save it somewhere you can easily find it, and do keep in mind as well too, in case you run into an issue running this with a missing OCX file, it has instructions on how to resolve that here. If you'd like your file structure to be a little bit cleaner and you choose to use the God container, we can use ISO to God. For this, it'd be the same thing here, just go ahead, find it, download it, and save it somewhere you can easily find it. I'll show you how to do both of them on here, but really whichever format you want is going to be up to you. Finally, if you're having any trouble extracting those, I'd recommend download 7-zip from the link in the description, download the version that works for you here, and you'll be able to extract. So these will be the two files you'll be working with depending on what format you want. Let's go ahead and do a raw file format. For this here, we can go ahead and use Xbox Image Browser. You can just right click this and extract it into its own folder. Once you have this here, if you're going to be using the raw files, you should have these three files in here. Just go ahead, launch the Xbox Image Browser. It should look like this, and thankfully it's pretty simple to use. Now you can minimize out of this, and for this here, we need to open up each image and extract it out. Click on File, Open Image File. Be sure to find whichever game you're trying to extract, and here we're going to have Disk 1 and Disk 2. So let's go ahead and work on Disk 1 here first. Once we have this, you're going to highlight the ISO itself, right click, and extract. You will have to find exactly where you want to save this to, but just go ahead, find your folder, even create a new folder, and then hit OK to extract out your files to it. Once you hit OK, it's going to begin extracting out those raw files. Now you will want to extract each disk into its own directory. That's another thing to keep in mind. Don't just extract all of the games into the exact same directory. You're going to mix up all your files. It's not going to work like that. Extract each disk into its own disk directory like they are separate games. And once it's all completed, you should no longer see any activity here. So once that's done, we can click on File, close image. Now to work on disk 2, it's going to be the same thing. Click on File, open File Image, grab disk 2, or whichever other disk you're using, because again, there's also 3 and 4 disk games for the Xbox 360. Right click your ISO itself, and hit extract. Again, find the folder you want to save this to, but save it into a separate folder from your previous disk. Again, each disk needs to go into its own folder. Once you've selected that, it's the exact same thing. Just give it a few moments here to extract out everything. And there we go. Once that's all done, we can click on File, close image, and exit. So all of your disks should be extracted into their own directories. This is optimally the file format you should be looking for here. So you need to put your game, for example here, The Witcher 2, into its own directory called Witcher 2, just for example like that. And then in each one, just make them disk 1, disk 2, disk 3, disk 4 if applicable. And inside of each of these, you're going to have the raw data for each of these extracted disks. And that's exactly how they should look. If you choose to do this in God or Games on Demand format, it's going to be about the same process here. You're going to grab the ISO to God archive, right click this, and extract it with something like 7-zip into its own folder. Once you have it in its own folder, open this up and open up ISO to God. If this is your first time using it, click on Settings, and you're going to want to set a few things. You're going to want to set your output path. This is where your God contained games are going to be. Your rebuild path, this is where your ISO will be rebuilt, not the same one you're using. You're going to have to rebuild the ISO. I'll show how it works here. And then all these other settings are fine for now, but make sure the padding is set to full. Essentially, this will allow us to rip the files out of the ISO and then rebuild it without any padding and pack that into a God container. One more thing actually, I'd recommend in your settings here, if possible, just to minimize moving and such, it might be good to just set your output and rebuild paths to the same drive that your ISOs are physically sitting on. But once all that's set up, we can close out of that, go over to add ISO, and you want to browse for your ISO file. I found it here, so first of all, I'm going to grab Witcher 2 Disk 1. It should look something like this here. Now you can rename this if you want to. I'm not going to because you can actually just do that within Aurora, but it should look something like this where you have the game name, tile ID, media ID, and then disk 1 of 2 or how many. Make sure again your mode is set to full ISO rebuilt. We can save the rebuilt ISO and everything here is looking good. Click on add ISO. We're now going to do the same thing with the second one. So add an ISO, grab disk 2 and hit add ISO and add any of the other ones for your game. Again, some games are 3 or 4 disks in length, but once all that is set up here, we can now click on convert. It's going to work on each disk one by one, and what it's essentially going to do, as I said, is it's going to take your ISO file that you have right now, it's going to pull out all of the data itself without any of the padding. It's going to then put that into a new, smaller ISO, which is not going to be usable for us if we ever want to burn it, but it's then going to take that new ISO and then convert that to a God container. There's a lot of steps here, so make sure you have a good amount of storage space on hand, because temporarily you're going to have 2 or 3 times the size for each of your games here on your drive at once. So this doesn't take all too long, but just give it a few minutes to churn through each of your disks. Alright, so as you can see, both packages just finished here. Took about 10 minutes in all of this here. But once that's all done, we can now close out of ISO to God as we no longer need that. If you go over to wherever you've set your output and rebuild paths to, you should come in here to the rebuild paths and you're going to find 2 smaller ISO files. Don't worry, these ones are just temporarily needed, but we can delete these here to save some space. Now go back over to the ISO to God folder that you've set, go to the output directory, and inside of here, you're going to find the title ID. You're going to find a subdirectory here. And within this subdirectory, you're going to find 2 files and the accompanying .data files for them. And these 2 are going to be disk 1 and disk 2 respectively. So as you can see, as opposed to just a lot of raw extracted files, it's all in a contained format like this. So at this point now, whether you're using a God version of the game or an extracted version of the game, let's go ahead and get it transferred over. For this, I'll be using a USB drive that's been formatted to FAT32, but what you want to do is go into your USB drive, and if you're using the extracted version of this, you're going to want to create a folder called Games, and inside of here, you can then copy over your backed up game. So in this case here, I'll go over to Witcher 2. You should have both of your disk folders if you're doing a 2-disc game or 3 or 4 discs. It's going to be in this file format. And at this point, you can just right click, copy this out, and then right click and paste in here. And once it's been copied over, it should look like this. Again, this will be where your extracted games go. However, if you're going to be doing God games, then you're going to need to put them in a specific folder structure. So for this, if you're doing it off of USB, whether you want to play or transfer off of it, you can go into the USB drive. Again, make sure it's formatted to FAT32. And if you don't have a content folder, we need to right click and create a new folder and call it content. And inside of the content folder, we need to make a all zeros directory. It needs to be 16 zeros. So right click, create a new folder, and call it 16 zeros. And literally just type it out, say it out like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Once you have 16 zeros, double click that folder, and this is where you're going to copy in your game. So go back over to your ISO to God output directory, find the folder that has the title ID, right click, copy it out, or actually I'm just going to cut it because I'm going to move this here. So you can copy it out. Now go into your zeros directory and paste it right here. It is going to take some time to transfer this over, so just let it do its thing. All right, there we go. So with everything copied over, again, if you're going to be doing this within a extracted file format, you'll have to go into games, go into your game itself, and then you'll need to rip each disk into its own separate folder. And if it's going to be in Games on Demand God format, it'll be in content, 16 zeros, and then the title ID, another ID here, and then your disks and their accompanying data. So it should look something like that. Now what we can do is get out of here, right click, eject our USB drive, and move back over to our console to transfer these over. Once your console fires up, go ahead, plug in your USB drive, and there is going to be a setting that we'll have to tweak if you are using extracted folders for this, or extracted format on here. What you'll need to do if you're using Aurora or even Freestyle at this point is you'll need to go into the settings, go into content, and then over for your manage paths, whether this is going to be on an internal drive or an external drive, you'll need to find the folder which is going to have your games. And if it looks something like this, where it's going to be an HDD1 games, and then you have a folder for your game, you're going to probably need to change the scan depth from 2 to 3 if it was at 2 before, just because there's going to be another folder that you're going to be tearing through in order to get to the executable. So you might just have to change your scan depth on that. Aside from that, make sure you are searching your content zeros directory, and you should be all good at that point. Now, if you want to copy everything over, you can open up a file manager such as XeXMenu or the file manager within Aurora or Dashlaunch. For this, I'm going to hit the back button, go to File Manager. Within here, you're going to want to navigate to your USB drive, go to the Games directory, and if you're going to copy this as an extracted game, you're going to, again, make sure it looks like this. It'll be the game directory, and then disk 1 and disk 2. You're going to highlight this, tap the X button, navigate over to the left, go down, tap A to copy this, and then press the RB button on your controller. Now you can navigate over to HDD1 if you're going to transfer it to the internal drive. Go to Games, and right here, just like your other games that have been extracted, you can then hit paste to transfer this over. So once it's all done, it should look something like this. Again, the difference is going to be with your normal games, you would go in here, and you'd have the default XeX, while as in here with Witcher 2 or any other multi-disc game, you're going to go into that directory, and then you're going to have multiple discs here. However, I'm not going to be using this here, so I'm actually going to delete this because that's how you do it as extracted. However, if you're doing this as a Games on Demand game, this is what you do. For Games on Demand, go back into your file manager, open up the file manager, go down to your USB drive, go to the content directory, go to the zeros directory, and here, as you can see, Witcher 2 pops up. So you can tap the X button to copy this folder, navigate to the left, go down to copy, tap the A button to make sure it copies this out. Now tap the RB button, go down to HDD1 if you're going to transfer this internally, go to content, go to the zeros directory, now navigate over to the left, go down to paste, and tap the A button. Say yes if you're prompted for this, and it will now take your God version of the game and copy it from your external drive to your internal drive if that is what you are aiming for. Whether you're doing this as extracted or God, this will take a while, so just go ahead, let it do its own thing, and wait. Alright, so there we go, we just finished transferring that over, so we now have The Witcher 2 on the internal drive. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my USB drive since that's not going to be needed anymore, and I might as well do a rescan. So I'm going to go here, content, let's go ahead and scan the paths, and it should pick up our copy of Witcher 2. And there we go, we just bumped up 2 items. So it should look something like this. If you did it in God format, you're going to have disk 1 and disk 2. of course disk 3 and disk 4 on top of that, but if you did it with extracted format, it's just going to have the Witcher 2 for each one of these. So as you can see, this is now working as it should, and you're able to boot up this game, play it just fine. Now, there are some people who they do not like having both of these disks showing up here. What you can do if you're one of those people is you can just highlight, let's say disk 2, because logically we'd probably want to keep disk 1 here. You can highlight disk 2, you can press the Y button. Now go down to the rename option, press left on the D-pad, and tap A to hide this. It will now look like this, and now we can back out of it, and disk 2 is no longer showing up, even though it is installed on our system. Now, if you want to rename this as well to make it look a little bit cleaner, you can also tap the Y button on disk 1, go down to rename, and we can truncate this so we can just make it look like The Witcher 2, just like that, back out of there. Now, if you ever want to show that game again, what you can do on Aurora is press the B button to access the view, go on over to the right for options, and look for show hidden titles, and you're going to want to enable that. And as you can see, The Witcher 2 is now showing up. Well, disk 2 is. So now that we have a game such as The Witcher 2 installed, and I've shown you all how to hide or show the disk, how to rename it, and all that stuff there, I'll also show you all how disk swapping works. So again, I have covered this a few times here, but just for good measure, what you're going to want to do is make sure you go into Dashlaunch itself, and then go into behavior. And if you are using Aurora, you're going to make sure that AutoSwap is enabled. If you're using Freestyle Dash, you do not want to enable this. Also, if you're using the swap.xex, you do not want to enable this. So you can check the swap.xex by closing out behavior, going to plugins, and if there's no swap.xex, you're okay. So since I'm running Aurora for my main dashboard, I'm just going to keep AutoSwap enabled. Then you want to hit the RB button if you change that. Save it on your hard drive by hitting the X button here, and then tap RB again, and you can go down to quit. And in case you don't know what your default dashboard is, just wait and see what loads up here. As you can see, mine is Aurora, so that's why I'm using the auto swap feature on there. Now, to actually demonstrate it, this is how it's going to work, right? I haven't hidden any of these disks. Actually, I ended up unhiding this one right here just for this demonstration. But like I said, you would be playing on disk 1, and then when you need to switch to disk 2, the auto swap will kick in. So you don't always have to hit this every single time. So here is the nice thing about auto swap. Let's say you're playing a game such as The Witcher 2, where you load this in, you play through disk 1, and then when you get to the point where you need to play through disk 2, as opposed to physically popping in the disk, as long as you have both disks loaded up right here, it will just auto swap over to disk 2. In fact, if you have a save and you boot up disk 1 and you load that save, it will ask you to load up disk 2 and it will automatically swap over. In fact, I'll go ahead and show you all this. So for this, I'm going to go back and I'm going to hide The Witcher 2 disk 2 yet again. And I'm going to do the same thing with my Wolfenstein disks right here. So I'm going to work with disk 1, and what I'm going to do here is the exact same thing I showed you all before. I'm going to hide disk 2, I'm going to hide disk 3, and I'm going to hide disk 4. And finally, I'm going to take the first disk, and I'm going to rename this to just shorten it to Wolfenstein TNO. So it looks just like this. As you can see, it looks like a single disc game, much like Turok, much like Space Marine, much like Tetris, any of these other games. But this is how it works. Let's say I want to start this up, which I'm going to do that. So let's go ahead, load this up here, and wait a few seconds for everything to boot up. So as you can see, we have Wolfenstein: The New Order up and running right now. Well, at least we're getting to that point here. So we have to just get through all of this. And I'm just going to show you all clearly how this auto swap works. So this is the coolest thing if you've never done this before. As you can see, I'm here, The New Order. Let's go ahead, press start. I'm going to save to my hard drive. That's all good. Loading the profile settings, everything seems to be fine here. And I have started a game, but it's at the very beginning, so we'll just start a new game because there's actually a disk swap at the very beginning here. So I'm going to tap the guide button. And as you can see, since I'm running Aurora, if you pay attention to the bottom right of the screen, you can see the title ID, the media ID, the version, but pay attention, it says disk 1. that is what we are running right here. So in order for a disk swap to work, let's just see how it works. As long as you have everything set up, let's go ahead, start our game, saving our settings. Yep, that's okay. And it's now going to ask us here if we can swap disks. So when you get this message in your game, go ahead, accept it. As you can see, it prompted for disk 2, the screen went to black, and every game is going to look a little bit different, but right here with Wolfenstein at least, it brings you to this screen where it has this animation just showing the actual disk swap happening. And I'm not even going to cut this here, we're just going to keep it going, because it does take a bit to load in, but once it does, you'll see it working. So black screen, it loaded. Oh, funny, it said game over right there for a bit. But right here we have the first cutscene playing, and I'm going to see if I can skip this here. Well, it has to load in a bit. There we go. So press X to skip movie, and here we go. We are in game. And just to double check this, I can tap the guide button yet again while we're in game. And if you look in the bottom right corner, we still have the title ID there. However, the disk has changed to 2. So that is as easy as it is. That is AutoSwap. For anybody who is wondering, as long as you have your games accessible, installed, and you have your AutoSwap settings there, it does all the heavy lifting for you. It's extremely cool, it's super convenient, it's great. So that is how this works once you have all this set up for your multi-disc games. Alright, so for our final section here, let's say you have a game that is a little bit of an anomaly, an outlier, and it seems like there's not too many of these games, but it looks like the one that is known is Wolfenstein The New Order, so this might just get its own Wolfenstein section here. But there might be other games out there that are similar to this. They're quite rare, but this is an anomaly. Let's say you have a game, in this case here, we're going to use Wolfenstein The New Order. I'm going to pop it into my console here, and it is a multi-disc game. It is a 4-disc game. It is a huge one, but it has something that is really odd to it. You see, we're going to load it up here, and I'll just show you all on the system. Even though you can install it on the system just fine, however, you have to go about it a kind of different way. I have the disc inserted. This is disc 1, and disc 1 is a play disc, but it's also an installer disc. And what I mean by that is it's very odd here. You can hit the system button, go to file manager, and I'll show you. If we go into the DVD section, remember I showed in a previous section here for Halo 4 there was a content directory? Well, as you can see, there is no content directory on the DVD for this. However, I can assure you that when you boot this up, the only purpose of this disc is to install content on here, and then you play off of the other discs. So this game is a really odd outlier, and I'm really just going to dedicate how to install this, but if this helps for other games, awesome. Really what you want to do is on DVD, you'll want to install discs 2, 3, and 4. But first, you're going to want to pop in disc 1 and just run that as normal. So here on DVD, I'm going to show you an example of that. I have disc 1 inserted. Let's go ahead and fire this up. Now, thankfully here right at the beginning, the game is booting up just fine. There doesn't seem to be any issue here right off the bat, but you are not able to install the first disc properly according with this here. Now, it's going to bring up this message immediately before we even get in game, saying please select storage device for installed data. You're going to have to hit OK, and then you're going to select your internal hard drive. Once that is selected, just let it do its thing. This is all disc 1 is for. So essentially, even though this is a play disc, we are going to be treating this like an install disc, because you cannot just copy the files from the disc onto your console. You have to actually run this here. Now, if you're doing this from the DVDs themselves, once you have installed disc 1, it should prompt you that you're all good at that point and you can swap over, but go ahead, just exit out of the game and the content will be installed at that point. Right here, I just popped in disc 2, and we can now work on installing the other discs. We don't need to install disc 1 itself. We just popped it in, we treated it like an install disc. But now to copy the rest of these over, the other ones can work as either extracted or as God, whichever you're wanting on here. Since I just went over everything in more granular detail in the previous sections, I'm not going to do it here necessarily, but it's the same rules as before. Just like before, if you are going to run it as an extracted version, go ahead, hit the back button if you're using Aurora, go into the file manager, go to DVD, and highlight every single file. Just highlight and tap X on every single file and folder except for the system update folder. Navigate to the left, go down, hit copy, hit A on copy. Now go to the right using the RB button, go to HDD1, go down to games, create a new folder here, and I'll call this one here Wolfenstein, just call it the game name itself. There we go, Wolfenstein TNO, I know what that means, and in here, go into your Wolfenstein TNO folder. Now create a new folder for each disk. So here, again, we don't do disk 1, so we're going to call this one disk 2, for example. There we go. And we'll do the same with the other ones, whichever one you're going to be ripping over. So for here, we're going to make one, we're going to call it disk 3. And finally, of course, I mean, big thing to guess here, but we're going to call this one disk 4. There we go. So what you'll do, since this is disk 2, you'll just go into the disk 2 directory, then press the left button on the D-pad, go all the way down to paste, tap A, hit yes on this. It's now going to spin up the DVD and begin copying all the raw files here, so you'll have a nice extracted copy. And at this point, it doesn't matter what disks 2, 3, and 4 are. They can be in God format or they can be in extracted format. And again, if you're going to rip this in God format, you only do disks 2, 3, and 4 after you've done the installation of the first disk. Then you'll want to hit the back button to bring up system, go to scripts. You should already have the Aurora Disk to God installer. Go in here. Now you need to navigate to HDD1, go into content, highlight the zeros folder, tap Y, and once it brings this up, you're just going to hit yes to create a tile ID and a subdirectory, and then let it finish ripping over and do its own thing. If you thought this couldn't get any weirder, it is going to get weirder. So I'm not going to walk through the setup of the programs, because if you've seen the multi-disk section here, then you should have that down already. However, you need ISO to God for this game. That is a requirement. Even if you want to extract it, this is a requirement. You have to have ISO to God. However, if you do want the files to be in an extracted format, you can also use Xbox Image Browser, but you have to download ISO to God. So if you want all your games to be extracted raw files, sorry, this one's going to be the exception here. For this, we can open up ISO to God, the folder itself, and open up the executable. Of course, this is assuming you've used this before, so you will need to go into your settings, set your output directory, your rebuild directory, and set the padding to full ISO rebuilt, and save your changes. Now click on Add ISO. You're going to need to find the specific ISO for disk 1, so it's going to be this one right here, which is very clearly labeled. Hit open, and it's going to populate everything like this. Now you can make sure everything's all good here. There shouldn't be anything you have to edit, and you can now click on Add ISO. Now if you are going to be doing this in God format, go ahead and add the other 4. So for this, I'm going to go here, add. We're going to grab the second ISO, okay, grab the third one, we're going to grab the third ISO, and grab the fourth one, we're going to grab the fourth ISO. Again, only add all 4 if you want to stick to God format. However, if you want to be in extracted, you only need the first one. Once you're all ready to go, click on convert. It's now going to do the same thing as it's done for all the other disks, which it's now going to extract the game files into a new ISO that's not going to have the padding. It's then going to take that new unpadded ISO and convert that into a God container. So this one's going to take a little bit longer because it's 4 DVDs, so just wait and let it do its thing. Alright, so as you can see, we were able to get all of these converted over, so it did take a bit of time here, but we're all good at this point. So again, if you're going to be doing all these as God format, you're pretty much done converting them here, but if you want to do this as extracted, you have to do the first disk as God. That is a requirement. Now, if you're going to do extracted, let's go ahead, close out of ISO to God, and we're going to open up the Xbox Image Browser. For this, it's going to be the exact same thing as usual. Double click to open this. Let's bring it over here. We're going to go to File, open image file, find where you've backed up your ISOs over to, and we're going to completely skip disk 1. Again, we have to install that as God, but we can do disks 2, 3, and 4. For these ones here, you can grab disk 2, right click, extract, right click on the main ISO itself, and extract it. Just like usual, you're going to need to find where you want to save the extracted files over to. And thankfully disks 2, 3, and 4 don't have all too much data sitting on them. So as you can see, disk 2 has 209 files, but it's just under 4 gigabytes. So we just need to wait for this one to complete. And as you can see, this one is now done. So we can close out of disk 2. We're going to open up disk 3. And right click, extract, and do the exact same thing. Again, as I stressed in the previous section, make sure you're going to rip each disk into its own folder. You should treat them like different games. Don't just blow all the files into one folder. You do not want to do that. And we're at the end here, so once that's done, last thing, close the image, open this up. We're going to open up disk 4, exact same thing, highlight the disk, right click, extract, and let that extract. Again, this should just take a few moments here, but thankfully these ones go pretty fast. So there we go. Once that's all been extracted, we can now close out of that image. We're going to exit this, and we should be all good to go at that point. So of course, you're going to need a way to transfer this over, whether you're going to be using a USB drive or you're going to FTP it, what have you. Again, if you use a USB drive, make sure it's formatted to FAT32. And we're going to need to transfer everything over here. So if you did an extracted version of this, as you can see, I made a folder called Wolfenstein TNO, but inside of here, you're going to want 2, 3, and 4. It should look exactly like this. For this here, once you have everything set up, you're going to come back out, and again, if this is extracted, you can just right click and either copy or cut this. I'm just going to cut this, and inside of your USB drive, I'd recommend you make a new folder and call it Games, and inside of that Games folder, you can then copy over the Wolfenstein folder and all the disks will be there. Now again, we did need to use ISO to God. That is a requirement if you're working with the ISOs on this specific game. So for this, if you want to save some storage immediately, go into the rebuild directory. You're going to see the rebuilt ISOs here. These ones were just temporarily needed to repack everything. Just highlight all of them and delete that. There we go, we saved about 22 gigabytes worth of storage. Now go into the output directory, and you're going to see the title ID here, the subdirectory, and then you should have an accompanying file and data folder for every single disk that you've set up. So you should have, one file, one folder here if you're only doing disk 1. I'm doing all 4 disks, as you can see. But either way, if you want to copy this out, what you'll need to do is go into your USB drive. So right here, I'm going to right click here, make a new folder. If you don't already have a content folder, you want to create that now. And inside of the content folder, we're going to make a 16 zeros folder. So you make a new folder and you want to count out the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Once you have that, go into the zeros folder. Now go back over to where your ISO to God directory is, the working folder. Go into the output folder, grab this folder, which is going to be your content itself. So this should be the title ID. Right click, and you can either cut or copy this. I'm just going to cut it because I want to move this, and then paste it into the zeros folder on your USB drive. Again, this is the only anomaly game that I know of like this, and if there's any other ones, let me know. But if you're going to be working straight from the ISOs here, you have to convert the first one to God format, and the other two can be either God or extracted. It doesn't matter. But once all that is done, just go ahead, let it copy over. Alright, so as you can see, this is now transferred over successfully. So with all that done, we can now right click, eject our USB drive, and take it over to our console. If there's anything within the ISO to God directories, you can also get rid of those as well too, unless you want to keep them for some reason. Over at the console, go ahead and plug in your USB drive. As you can see, it's shown up like this, and now what you'll want to do is, of course, transfer over your files. Now, what you'll want to, over at the console, plug in your USB drive, and once it shows up, you'll just want to open up System. You can press the back button if you're using Aurora, go over to the File Manager, and let's go ahead and get everything transferred over. First of all, if you are going to be using your extracted versions of the game, you can go over to the USB drive, go into the games directory, grab the Wolfenstein TNO folder, and again, this should only have disks 2, 3, and 4, but from here, you can just grab the entire folder by highlighting it, tapping the X button, going over to the left, go down to copy, now hit the RB button, go to HDD1 if you're going to transfer it over. You can go into your games directory and you can paste it in here. And once it's been transferred, again, you should only have disks 2, 3, and 4 if you're using a fully extracted version. Now again, I'm not going to use the extracted version, so I'm going to get rid of this folder personally here. But if you are going to be doing this, you still need to bring over disk 1, which is going to be in God format. So let's go ahead and just reset everything there. We can open up the file manager yet again and go down to USB 0. In your folders, you should have a content directory, a zeros directory, and then you should have your directory with the title ID for Wolfenstein The New Order. Tap the X button to select it, go to the left on the D-pad, go down to copy, tap A to copy out this folder, then hit the RB button, go to HDD1, go to content, zeros, and we're going to paste this here. So say yes to that. And now it's going to copy over disk 1, because again, disk 1 has to be God. But if you're going to be using all of them in God format, that's fine. One thing with this game to keep in mind is it does take a bit, because this is just over 20 gigabytes worth of game, so you'll be sitting here for a bit. Alright, so there we go, we just copied it over, so we can go ahead, exit out of everything here. I'm going to remove my USB drive, and let's also do a rescan. So at this point we can go to settings, go to content, and I'm going to scan now. And it should be able to pull in all 4 disks at this point. As you can see, the ticker did go up for games, and here we go. Now, I decided to do everything in God format, so I have disk 1, disk 2, disk 3, and disk 4. So this is exactly where we want to be at this point. Again, just to stress this, disks 2, 3, and 4 can be either extracted or in God format, but disk 1, it is required, it has to be in God format. So let's go ahead and do our install of this. What you can do is just boot up disk 1 and wait a few seconds for it to load in. So it is loading in with no issues, as you can see, but when we first boot up here, we are going to have to do an install. Again, this is a really odd one because this doesn't have an actual content folder. It looks like a play disk, but as you can see here, it asks us to install data. So all you have to do is hit OK, then pick your internal hard drive, and you're gonna have to wait for a bit. I will warn you, this install does take a while. Even I had this running on a SSD, which, yeah, you're not gonna get the biggest speed boost on the 360 of all things, but it will eliminate things such as, you know, random seeks and such like that. But even on that, it did take a while, so you're just gonna have to be patient and wait for this to get to 100%. Alright, so after a long while, we got to the end here. Now, as you can see, it does this thing, which might look like the game is crashed, but it doesn't. It doesn't get up to 100%. It gets to 99%, and after a bit, it then kind of soft reboots in a way. So this is still disk 1, but at this point here, the content has successfully installed. So we are good to go at this point. From here, you'll know that the game is working successfully because it won't have an install prompt. It will just ask you to press the start button, to which you can do that, pick your save, hit OK on there, should load in your profile settings, and just to make sure this is all working properly, we can just start a new game on any difficulty, and it's going to ask us to swap disks. So as long as you have your settings set properly and everything here, you can tap the A button. It'll say that it's waiting for disk 2, the screen should then go black, and after a bit, we should get to this screen here, where it has this little animation showing us that we are swapping disks, and after a bit, we come to another black screen, kind of a loading type screen, and as you can see, the first cutscene is playing, so we are all good to go at this point. Thankfully, this has successfully worked. So we can even tap the guide button here, and if you look in the bottom right hand corner, you'll see that it shows disk 2 is loaded, and I'm running title update 1 because I did download and put that on at one point. But let's go ahead and skip this. As you can see, we are now in game, so this is working successfully. Thankfully, we're all good to go, so that is how you can install Wolfenstein The New Order and get it up and running. Like I said, this game is an anomaly right here, so it is an impressive port on the Xbox 360 on top of that, but it's also kind of one of the last ones, and I guess they want to do a little bit of a curveball for the installation here. But at this point, we're all good to go, so this game is totally playable. Let's go ahead and exit back out to Aurora. And the good news is from here, you do still have 4 discs in place, but you can do the exact same thing as before, where you can go in and hide the other ones and rename them, just as I've shown in the previous segment. The last thing that you could do is, since the content has been installed from disk 1, you technically no longer need disk 1. So even if you want to, you can just go here and you can straight up delete disk 1, but make sure you keep 2, 3, and 4 in place. Alright, so either way, we are at the very end of this video here. It's been a long one, there was a lot here, but I did want to cover as much as I could and really cover these scenarios for you all. So like I said, we ended up covering having a basic, I guess, base game that you play from, and dealing with an install disk, dealing with multiple play disks such as The Witcher 2, where you don't do an install but you have to play off the both of them, and even an odd anomaly, which this is again the only one I know of, but something like Wolfenstein The New Order, where technically disk 1 is an install disk, but it doesn't have any content that you install traditionally, so you have to treat it as 4 play disks, but one of them is an installer. Either way, this was a fun and odd one to cover here. But with all that being said here, that is about the end of this video here. If you learned something, if you helped out, if you enjoyed it, a like would absolutely be appreciated. This video did take a surprising amount of time to record here, just because, again, all these games, they get kind of big after a bit. There's a lot of transfers, all that fun stuff, but we'll get it nice and wrapped up here at the end. Anyways, that is really about it for this video here. If you enjoyed this, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone.